Hey guys, and welcome back to the podcast. I'm extremely excited to be joined by Hall of Fame tennis writer Steve Flink. Steve, how are you doing? The Australian Open has just concluded. What do you think?
Yeah, it was a good tournament. Yeah, I enjoyed it. I particularly enjoyed everything up until those last two rounds for the men. The women were great all the way through, and they had their most exhilarating stuff at the end was Keys winning those last two matches against Swiatek and Sabalenka. That was spectacular. The men, you wish it could have ended on a slightly higher note because it was shaping up so beautifully, and you had the Djokovic upset over Alcaraz, or certainly the victory over Alcaraz, and I thought, I thought maybe he'd be able to overcome the injury, beat Zverev, and really give it a go against Sinner. We didn't get a chance to see that, and then you hoped at that point, once Djokovic retired after a set, I hoped that maybe Zverev might have his moment, or at least make this a gripping final round contest, which he did not do. So, and then similarly, you had Ben Shelton with a very good run with a chance with 2-set points to at least take the lead against Sinner. I don't think he would have won from a setup, but he certainly had to have that set. And if you serve as well as Ben does, and you already had an earlier break, you've got to serve it out at 6-5 when you get a couple of set points, which he didn't do. So those are my qualms. However, everything that preceded those last two rounds in the men, there were so many great moments along the way, and then the women just had a terrific tournament period. So all told, I give the tournament a 92. If I'm grading, a
Oh
92.
wow,
Yeah,
92 is very high. Amazing.
yeah,
Okay, well that's pretty good. Yeah, I mean I agree. I think the start of the tournament especially was exceptional. There were some incredible matchups, and I'll talk about it later. But also we got a few of the next gen players come through and really make a big splash
yes,
against some of the bigger players. And sometimes when you have those upsets, you think, oh no, the big players are out. But because they're so talented and they also made a couple of runs as well, a few of them, it was almost it was more excitement, I think, around more than thinking, oh no, actually the seeds are falling, which sometimes can be the case. So that was really great to see, and we saw some incredible matches as well up until, as you said, the last two rounds. And I think we were maybe robbed a little bit of that semi-final with Djokovic and Zverev, and not Djokovic's fault by any means. It was just an unfortunate occurrence that he felt he couldn't play on. But
yeah, and just
yeah,
I agree. And what was unfortunate was that the fans, I understand on one level that you're very disappointed. You're sitting there expecting a minimum 3 sets, and then you feel like you got a decent chance for 4 or 5 sets, and the match is over in a set. But you would think they would cut some slack to somebody that's won this tournament 10 times and is, to borrow the old Jimmy Connors expression, spilled his guts on the court so many times to get those titles, that I thought that was very rude. And I thought it was really quite remarkable how well Zverev defended Djokovic, how genuinely he did it. And without being insulting toward the crowd, but telling them that was not fair. That was a very sad moment, I thought, because I think of the Aussie crowds, by the way, as not being like that. Having a certain kind of, that's why it's called the happy slam. They're usually kind of fair-minded, congenial, very impassioned people, but not in a negative sense. That was very negative. And I thought that was a shame.
yeah, I agree. It was an interesting moment because it seemed like Novak was almost puzzled at the time when it happened as well. I think he, normally when the crowd reacts in a certain way, I feel like he either expects it or he takes it in his stride. But maybe because he'd given it his all, it was a tiebreaker. He clearly felt like he couldn't carry on, and you'd expect, as any player would expect, that actually he's not going to get booed. As you said, he's won it 10 times, the Australian Open title, but instead he got. I mean, I don't think it was everyone, but it was definitely a section of the crowd were booing him. So he did look a bit dejected almost, and it was interesting to hear him say after. And I'm assuming it's not just because of the crowd. To hear him say after that it could be his last time in Melbourne, and I assume it's also to do with, and it will be to do with, anyways, his results this year.
Oh yeah, I think
Potentially,
so.
if he
I
doesn't
don't.
win a slam, he's not competitive, then maybe he'll say, I don't want to carry on not being competitive, right, for a long period of time.
Yeah, I hear you. I didn't feel mine. I interpreted it more that he just doesn't know. Period, and it will depend on the results. I didn't feel that he was sort of a. It was sort of a get even comment. Like if that's how I'm going to be treated, then you won't see me again. I didn't feel that. In fact, I almost thought he leaned a bit more toward he did expect. I felt he was heading a little bit more in that direction. But and in any case, it was too bad. I think great champions deserve better, and he had a lot of people, not just Zverev, defending him on that. Only thing I'll say about the crowd, yes, it was quick, it was abrupt, but that's how it often happens with these things. You're not always going to have somebody falling down, breaking an ankle, and they have to be carried off the court. Something like the Zverev moment against Rafa at the French back in 22. You're not always going to have something that obvious where a player's writhing in pain. But I did think it was very apparent that Djokovic was not comfortable that entire set. It got worse at the end, but he never looked right to me. And therefore, I wasn't that shocked because it didn't look to me like he really thought he could play 3, 4, 5 sets. So, in any case,
Yeah,
sad moment.
100%. And leads me on to the point that if people were keeping up to date with Djokovic and what was going on before that semi-final, they would have known, okay, well, he clearly got injured against Alcaraz. Yes, he recovered, but I think it was the painkillers, adrenaline, and then he didn't practice for a couple of days. So the fact that he was on the practice court should signal to people that who potentially might have even pulled out of the match before it even started. We might have got a Nadal Kyrgios situation from Wimbledon 2022 where he just pulls out before the match started. So I think they were lucky to, well, fortunate anyway, to get some tennis and some high quality tennis as well as a long set of tennis. So, it would have been a lot worse, I think, if it was a 6-1, 6-2 set and then he called it quits. So he
Yeah,
definitely,
it's a good point. Good point you're
yeah,
making. And I feel like that that he could have really done a lot more damage if he'd played on, even if he'd lost in straight, to the point where there would have been almost no way he was going to. Let's just say he actually won in 4. Let's say he'd come back and won in 4. I think he could have been been in a quandary there, and maybe had to default the final, which would have been a shame. So things worked out.
yeah, 100%. And on Djokovic, because we're talking about him, what did you think of his level throughout the tournament?
Well, I thought first 2 rounds, understandably, when he dropped those sets, just sort of feeling his way into the tournament. He played one warm-up tournament where he lost in the quarters to Riley Opelka. So he'd had a few matches, but he was just trying to get his bearings and was not that sharp in those matches. But I've seen that so many times from him in early rounds of majors. I didn't give it much thought. The question to me was, okay, how does he respond when he plays Mahac and, you know, those next 2 matches against the Czechs? How was he going to respond? He was terrific against Lehechka too. Those 2 matches were I thought very, very impressive. Not dropping a set to either, because there were a few. There was a sense that maybe he could be in a little danger in either one of those. Both those guys are playing really well and capable of testing him for sure. And I thought he set the stage for the Alcaraz match, because he now felt like he was playing the kind of tennis he wanted to play, and he had lifted his game substantially from where he had been in the first 2 rounds. So I loved the way he was playing in rounds 3 and 4, and then the Alcaraz match was a beauty. I enjoyed that one immensely.
Yeah, that was a very entertaining match and clearly had its peaks and troughs as well. And I think it was very strategic, I think, by the end of it. People realize if you look at it from the aftermath and in hindsight, you look back at the match and clearly there was Djokovic who came out and at first he was fine, then he got injured midway through the first set. Then there was the period in that second set he wasn't moving too well, and then with the first set, and then clearly the painkillers kicked in, the adrenaline, and he was moving okay and started playing some really good tennis. And I think Alcaraz on the other side of the court probably struggled to adapt, started trying to change how he was playing, scared he was going to miss, and didn't want to, I guess, let him off the hook and wanted to try and take him into deep trenches. But maybe the wrong strategy moving forward on his part. What was your take on how Alcaraz dealt with the whole situation, and was there a bit of naivete on his part with the way that he approached it after he saw Djokovic get injured?
Yeah, I think you assessed it well. Anybody in his shoes is going to be a bit confused initially because the injury occurred at 4-all in the first set. The first set was interesting, by the way, because people forget too easily that Djokovic had the early break. Often when he grabs that early break, that set is in his hands. He's pretty good at protecting an early break and going on to win a 6-3 or 6-4 set. But Carlos played a really good game to break back in the third game. He won this long 26-stroke exchange, and he got his teeth back into it. But it was still hanging in the balance when the injury happened at 4-all. And a long game on Novak's serve, and he could well have held that game and didn't. And then that's when he took the timeout, and that's when he came back and Carlos easily served out at love, and it was a 6-4 in Carlos's pocket. Okay, I understand. No doubt Novak, as you alluded to, was not moving terribly well. I think he was just trying to figure out how much he could move, how much he could tax himself. So he was going for, bigger shots and conserving himself in terms of how much running he would do within each point. So I get the idea that Carlos could at first be confused and think maybe he should extend the rallies. Frankly, if I'm coaching him and I'm Ferrero, I would say, look, you got to just you stay with your game. Don't be focusing on him. You know how you like to play, and you know what your best chance is to beat him, which is not to play conservatively like that. And so, be that as it may, I thought it was still quite a fascinating set because, again, Djokovic has the early break. This time he bolts out to 3-love, and Carlos got it back to 3-all. So it wasn't as if Carlos just collapsed in that second set. And finally, in the last game at 4-5, Novak jumps on him, played a couple of great returns, and broke. So I didn't feel that it was just so clear cut that Alcaraz got completely befuddled and didn't know what to do. He was somewhat confused, yes, but he did have that break back in the second to give himself a chance before Djokovic took it at the end. Then I thought by early in the third, Djokovic was early to middle third was feeling that he could move better now. The painkillers kicked in, whatever the reasons, he's now playing really well, I thought. And Carlos is trying to sort of rearrange things in his mind and figure out what to do. But again, there were none of the sets, of all 4 sets, none of them were lacking in suspense because in the third set, you had Djokovic had gotten the early break and he's up 4-2 and Carlos breaks back before Novak broke again and won the set 6-3. So, these were intriguing sets because Carlos looked like he got quite a lift when he broke back in the third. I had the feeling he was like, okay, I can still do this. And Djokovic did a good job to bear down and break him again and then serve out the set and get the early break in the fourth. And then I thought the fourth they both played, it was pretty exhilarating. So then by then I think Carlos was now going for his shots more and he was playing some spectacular tennis himself. But Novak had that early break which he protected all the way through despite some difficult moments. And where it got really intriguing to me was that stage there when Djokovic was up 4-2 in the fourth and had the break point for 5-2, and they had a long 35-shot exchange, and Carlos won that rally, which looked like it was going Novak's way several times. Carlos defended well. He ran down a couple of balls. He did a terrific job to win that point and hold on. And then he's got a couple of break points in the next game. Djokovic fended him off on the break points and held on and eventually served out the match, won at 6-4 in the fourth. But I thought the tennis in the fourth maybe was the best tennis of the match. And it was the one set which really came down to one break. I also thought that was intriguing, is that this time an early break for Djokovic was the end of the story, and he protected it and he played really well in the fourth. So, and I thought Carlos played quite well himself, and the fans were really enjoying it. They would have loved it if Carlos could have pulled it into a fifth. They would have been more than happy to see a fifth. But Djokovic, in turn, he did make an interesting comment afterwards about the painkillers working. But toward the end of the fourth, he did allude to feeling some pain again. So obviously, in his mind, he's saying, you can't let this close this out now. I thought from Djokovic's end, it was even though he was broken, he had all those breaks against him. The couple in the first set, and then he was broken once in the second and once in the third, not in the fourth. But overall, I thought he served really quite well. And the second serve in the third and fourth sets was just terrific. He was going for pretty big second serves, slicers in the deuce court. Carlos was not adjusting his return positioning. And Novak was winning he ended up winning 58% of his second serve points, which was a great percentage. And that, in the end, I think that may have been the overriding reason that he won. That and just the great ball striking. That was the other thing that hit me, was that he was on top of the rallies. He was, to me, dictating more than he usually does against Carlos, beating him to the punch. Part of that might have been the confusion that set in Carlos earlier, but I don't think that was true in the fourth. I think by then he just was outplaying him, out-hitting him from the baseline. So I thought it was as almost all Djokovic Alcaraz matches are. I thought it was very compelling. Obviously, the one match of theirs in the whole series there's only two matches I think that you could say were disappointing for those looking for hard-fought, close contests. The Wimbledon final last year, where Carlos raced through the first two sets and fended off Novak in a third set tiebreak after having triple match point on his serve earlier. And then Novak beating Carlos decisively in turn in the UN Championships, end of 23, surprisingly one-sided. It was hard fought, but the scoreline was pretty straightforward. But otherwise, their matches are usually, they really have been intriguing and suspenseful, and just kind of a delight, from my standpoint, a delight to watch because of the way the points play out. I think it's actually more fun to watch Djokovic play Alcaraz than it is to see Sinner play Djokovic. And then, more in line with what we could see also with Sinner and Alcaraz too, is exciting to watch. But I feel like from Djokovic's standpoint, the matchup against Alcaraz, it's always intriguing, and this was no exception.
Yeah, agreed, Steve. Great commentary. Yeah, I think the rivalry between Novak and Carlos, I think there's also the added layer to it that, it's a cross between generations, with Novak being, the great, he's definitely the greatest on paper. And then you have Carlos, who's, almost like the prince coming through, and he's already won 4 slams at the age of 21, and he's trying to, usurp almost Novak there. I think with Sinner, he's an incredible player, and we'll get on to him in detail in a bit. But I think it's also the fact that there's a bigger clash of styles with Carlos and Novak. I feel like with Sinner and especially Sinner now. I think maybe Sinner a couple of years ago it would have been a bit different, but Sinner now compared to Djokovic, there are now quite a few similarities. I feel like it doesn't quite gel the same way as that Carlos and Novak rivalry for sure. And on your point as well earlier about Ferrero, if you were in Ferrero's shoes, you would have told Carlos, look, stick to your guns after the first set, stick to the game plan, don't get distracted by what's happening on the other side of the court. And I completely agree, because, he won the first set. So why would you then think, no matter what happened on the other side of the court, he got injured, whatever, unless Novak starts playing some incredible tennis midway through the second set, then you adjust, you adapt, as the great players do. But until it gets to that point, surely you think, I'm going to stick with what was working. But it was interesting to see him obviously change tact, and maybe he overthought it a little bit, but that was interesting. And I agree that it wasn't a case of him being completely passive throughout. There were some incredible points. But I think the biggest difference to me, especially in the rallies anyway, was that you just felt that, and you mentioned it, Novak was the one dictating the majority of those points. He was the one who was willing to go line first, or take that little bit of extra risk, or hit those smaller targets, whereas that would normally be Carlos who would be the one trying to dictate and be the one in charge of the points. And I felt he was constantly catching up, being reactive, and being on the back foot, and that's not his most natural game anyway. We know he can play different ways. So I think that also then translated into some of the real crunch points, some of the pressure points, as they like to say, now in the match where Carlos maybe wasn't as proactive as he could have been, and we'll obviously talk about the final, and that was one of the biggest, not criticism, but one of the biggest insights I got from the final was Zverev, because I don't think he played that badly in the final, but again, it was the pressure points, and I feel like there's the same with Carlos here. I think Novak played those big points a lot better than Carlos generally, and
yeah, and
that,
some of what you're describing there, I agree with you, but it reached a point where I thought that wasn't a question that by the third and fourth sets that Carlos was not being the aggressor as often as he could have, so much as it was Djokovic beating him to the punch. That's how I saw it, at least. And the other thing was, I thought that Djokovic had an especially good night on the return.
Yes.
And I think that really helped a lot. He was able to handle a lot of kick serves in the ad court, second serves that had been an issue for him in prior clashes against Carlos. And he just overall was timing his returns well, keeping Carlos under more pressure on his serve than Carlos is accustomed to against Novak. Not that he ever expects it to be easy to hold, but I thought he had a particularly tough time holding against Novak in this match. And he did very well. I mean, look, he's broken once in the first. He's broken twice in the second. He's broken twice in the third. And it could have been two more times in the fourth if he hadn't fended off that break point at 2-4 in the fourth. So I thought Carlos was kind of under siege on his serve. And that's a little unnerving, too. When feeling that kind of pressure on your serve almost every time out.
100%. I think I mean, it's difficult when you always feel like you're having to fight tooth and nail to hold your serve, and then, it ends up being on Novak's serve, and in a few of the instances, he would hold to love or 15, and he was racing through them at times when especially after he got injured, because he was serving bigger, as you mentioned. The first serve was bigger, the second serve, that big slice serve out wide on the juice side, and you touched on it earlier when we were chatting, that Alcaraz was a little bit stubborn, and I almost couldn't believe when I was watching it, and I was saying to the TV, like, Carlos, change your return position, because it was crazy to me that he wouldn't change it. Someone of his level, I play nowhere near the level that we're talking about here, but even at a club level standard, I feel if I'm playing someone and I feel like I can't make enough returns in one or two games, and you start tinkering and you adjust, right? You try and work it out. And I think for Carlos, it was interesting and a bit strange to see him not change.
No, I agree.
Not go to the right, not even try and cut off the angle. He didn't really try to do anything. And it was to me, it was very strange to see from him, because he seems to have a very high tennis IQ, but maybe that was a moment where he needed Ferrero to tell him. And maybe that's where the coaching pod, and that's taken a little bit away from the players having to think for themselves potentially.
Yeah, we'll never know how Djokovic would have adjusted himself if Carlos had adjusted, what Novak would have changed. But I agree, it was very surprising. But it also made me think a bit of the Olympics. Now, Olympics, he was standing way back, unlike this match. Way behind the baseline, and Novak was taking advantage of that. And although he had to fend off, I guess, 8 break points in the match, he never lost his serve, and 2 tiebreakers on clay. It was a great effort. And I felt like that surprised me there, too, but in that case, I don't know what the rules were exactly. I guess Juan Carlos, I believe, was there for the final, but I don't know if he was in a position to yell much advice to. Obviously, in Australia, he could have. He could have said any number of things, but they seem to be. I don't know what your observation is. They seem to be changing it a bit. That Juan Carlos is trying to not be quite so aggressive with the comments. There was a stage there a couple of years back where he was constantly shouting things. It's almost like he wanted to talk to him after every point. That seems to have changed, but maybe they went to too much of an extreme here on the other end, because I would have thought that would have been a very easy thing for him to address from courtside, to get him to move on your, change your positioning. And didn't appear that he did that.
Yeah, I wonder whether they thought, and I agree, I think in the past it's been almost like Carlos has gone to him for advice very regularly during matches, and that has been less so, definitely, I think, especially in this tournament. I think it's more maybe Ferrer needs to be more selective with when he says it, and obviously we don't know exactly what's going on. Maybe he did say something, we missed it, but it almost felt like as he matures, he probably wants Carlos to problem solve a bit by himself. And as he gets more and more skilled, he will know his game better and better. The opponents, he's got a better feel. He's the one on the court. That makes sense. But I think in this specific situation, after it's happened for a number of games, you would expect, and maybe he did say it, and maybe Carlos just didn't take it on board, but he would expect him to say, look, tinker, do X, Y, Z to change it and give Novak a different look. Because especially from that juice side, it just felt like Novak was pummeling him into the forehand.
Well, he was
from the start, and it was crazy to watch.
That's where your use of the word stubborn comes in.
Yeah,
because then there's a part of Carlos is saying, keep proving it to me. Keep proving to me you can do that, because I don't think you can keep this up, hitting your second serve with more speed, all that slice, driving me nuts with it. You're going to start double faulting, or something's going to go wrong, and I'm going to get inside your head. Whatever his thinking was, I think he obviously thought that Djokovic couldn't sustain that level. Being that accurate, that close to the lines, that much bite on the second serve. But, look, I still think he's a very, really intelligent young guy. And, he'll learn from these experiences. And I also think the bottom line is, for all the analysis, he also just got outplayed.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah, he did. And I think it's a testament to Djokovic's skill set, right? I think we talk about the returning and how incredible he is in terms of his sliding backhands and agility and defensive work, etc. But I think one of the biggest things with him is, for me anyway, is his mental game, his mental fortitude. He's arguably the best when it comes to the mental side of tennis, I would argue. And the fact that he's able to adapt as well. So as he's gotten older, he's got so many different ways of playing. He's bolted up the serve. He can come forward. He can transition well, and his net game has improved so much as well. With the forehand, we've seen the last couple of years, it's so much bigger when he needs it to be, especially on clay. That's why he's become so dangerous on clay, because he's been able to hit through the court so much cleaner and with more penetration. And I think we saw that in this match. He got injured, but then he found a way to win and adapt, and that's a superpower of his, I would say, because
this has been I couldn't agree more, and it's been the case more and more since the turnaround in his career, which was basically Wimbledon 2018. And since that time, I think the match playing prowess and the flexibility, the adaptability has become great. It's a whole different level from anything he exhibited before. And interestingly enough, Roger Federer, who hasn't always been, Roger's been more willing to lavish praise on Nadal through the years. But he said something in 2021, which was one of those 3 slam. That's when Novak got within 1 match of the Grand Slam. And I remember him being quoted somewhere along the line there, saying, Novak can beat you in so many, he's beating these guys in so many different ways. And I thought that was the ultimate compliment, that it would come from Federer to say that. Not to put the other guys down, but to credit Djokovic for his flexibility and different game plans. So we're in accord on that.
Yeah, I mean, it's just incredible to see. And, it's interesting because the similarity between, I guess, Djokovic and Alcaraz is that at such a young age, Alcaraz has different ways of playing. But with him, you can see the age difference, because with him, it's a shot selection. He's only 21. Yeah. So it's about knowing when to play, the X, Y, and Z, knowing when to play, and we were saying when to stick with your game, play aggressively, play more practically, or then sit back, grind a little bit. So, and that's going to take some time still. He's still so young. He's won 4 slams. So I think people, when they look at the match and they say, why hasn't he done X, Y, Z? And like I was saying at the time, but then I look back at it and think, well, he's still only 21, right? He's coming up against someone who's won 24 slams, who's extremely experienced. And I like to say, he got old manned. It was, Novak used all of his experience in this match to really show Carlos, this is the way to do it.
What I want to add to that is that it's also true, but what makes Carlos so fascinating is, let's look at Casper Ruud in the U.S. Open final. He should win that match, even though it's his first slam. I get it. But look at the guys he's beaten since. He's beaten Djokovic in 2 Wimbledon finals, and he beat Zverev in the French final, but that's only after winning a 5-setter over Sinner in the semis. So he's played some really impressive big matches where the shot selection did not let him down. So it's kind of gone both ways. So there are days when it does, but sometimes he doesn't get in his own way. And of course, the always evident is that streak in him that wants to be a crowd pleaser, that wants to be a shot maker, that wants to play the kind of tennis that's going to have the crowd on their feet when maybe that's not always necessary. So he has to fight that inclination, but he's done a pretty good job to be where he is today.
Yeah, for sure. And when it clicks for him, I feel like he is arguably got the best level on tour. When it clicks, when it really does click for him, he's so difficult to play against. I feel like his ceiling is higher than anyone else. I just think that's how I see it currently. But it's just a case of, and I think we discussed this the back end of last year after the US Open, that it's the fact that Sinner is a lot more consistent in the fact that he's constantly hitting the 7s and 8s out of 10s. Whereas with Carlos, he can potentially dip to a 5, but he can also play a 9 out of 10, right? And he has that bigger range. Whereas with Sinner, he's always in that real kind of locked in 7 to 8 range, constantly playing consistently. And
I give him a lot of 9s as well, not necessarily 10. He throws maybe not 10s, 9s. But what just before we get on to Sinner, I know we spent a lot of time on the Djokovic match, which is well deserved. But I would just say this: the most interesting part of the upcoming year is going to be, aside from Djokovic going for that 25th, is going to be to see how the Sinner-Alcaraz rivalry plays out, because all the things you just alluded to about Carlos when he's having his ordinary or less than ordinary days versus his sublime days, and Sinner in that solid range all the time. Is he going to at least be able to hold his own this year, which I believe he will when he plays Carlos? Because I think it's remarkable looking back on last year, as great as Sinner played the whole year, and he divides those slams. He wins Australia and the US, and Carlos wins the 2 in between. And yet he came out 0-3 against Carlos in their rivalry, and he's not going to be satisfied with it. I think Sinner is determined, not in a bitter personal way, by the way, because I think those two guys like each other. Yeah. There's some natural distance, but they respect each other so much. But he does not like the taste of going 0-3 against who is the young man who's now going to be his rival for a decade to come.
Yeah, I can't wait. And obviously we were potentially going to get a Sinner-Alcaraz final. That's how the draw came out, but it wasn't to be in Australia. But hopefully we get one of those, if not this year, soon, because I feel like it's well overdue. And I say that given they're both so young, but now that they've got 7 slams between them, you'd expect them to now meet at some point. So hopefully we do see that.
But that's the other intriguing thing, too. You just said it. It's now 4-3 in slams. Sinner has narrowed the gap.
Yeah.
And that's going to be the other intriguing thing, not just their head-to-head, but how many slams they each pile up and who eventually wins the most. And, I'd be it'll be fascinating. I mean, I'd love to know if we sit and you and I are having the same conversation 5 years from now after the Australian in 2030, I mean, where will they be then? Where will these two guys be then? Are they in the double digits? But they're going to be collecting these big prizes on a regular basis.
Yeah, definitely. I think as long as they both stay relatively fit and healthy, I don't see why they wouldn't. They're phenomenal players. And talking of the rivalry, of course, Sinner was the one who came out on top this tournament. Went back to back at the Australian Open. I think clinical tournament generally from him. Only dropped 2 sets. One against, which was a surprising one against Tristan Schoolkate from Australia, who played really well, I thought, in that match.
He did.
It was great to see him come forward, serve volley. I mean, that was great. It was a great watch. And then Holger Rune, who I think showed some real dogged determination against Sinner and took a set off him. I think clearly also struggled a little bit physically. I know Sinner got some cramping issues in that match as well. I didn't manage to take him to 5, but showed a better, I think, version of himself at this Australian Open. So hopefully,
just a quick comment on that one, if I may. I felt like Sinner was I was worried about him watching it, and you'd see him sitting at the changeover, shaking a bit, and he was not it. He was in trouble there, and obviously the trainers had to give him something to steady him, and he was a little dizzy, I guess. And I think what may have reassured him, one, he's just very professional and very determined, and he's a much better fighter than given credit for. And secondly, I think was the reassurance that he kind of knew that Runa was beat up from a couple of 5-setters and a long 4-setter, and he knows that Holger physically, he hasn't shown that he can deal with these majors yet. So I think that was in the back of Sinner's mind. If he could weather this storm, and he did, but if he'd been playing somebody else that day, I don't know. He was not, and he'd said he'd woken up not feeling great that morning. Something was wrong with him that day, and I'm glad that it didn't linger, that he got through the Runa match, and that was the end of it. And yeah, he had some problems, a little bit of cramping later on with Ben Shelton, but by and large, he was okay. A little niggling thing in the final too. There was a moment where he was sort of shaking himself out on his leg, and so I'm not saying he was 101%, but he was not in the dangerously vulnerable state that I thought he was for a while in the middle of the Holger Rune match.
Yeah, it was reminiscent of that shaking that Djokovic had in Cincinnati against Alcaraz. It was very similar when they had the towel over and the hands were shaking, and
yeah,
you thought, "Oh no, what's happening here?" But it was great to see him recover, and obviously Djokovic as well, and really, recover well, and then find some of their best tennis, which was great to see. For Yannick, I mean, he's the hard court king. I think it's fair to say he's won the last 3 hard court Grand Slams. Does he have, what are his weaknesses on hard court, Steve? How do you see his game on hard court at the moment? Because if you were to look at it and say, okay, this player should play this way against him, and that's how they get the job done, that's how they get the win against him, to dissect Sinner and actually cause him issues, how would you go about how do you go about formulating that game plan?
Yeah, no, I think you got to be a little risky. I remember, like, for a while in the Tommy Paul match at the U.S. Open last year, that there was a stage where Tommy should have won the first set. I felt like he was being ultra aggressive, and you can unsettle him at times if you play that way, if you're willing to be that daring. But it's a very difficult proposition because of how well he defends out of the corners, how solid he is. I think of a couple of years ago when I felt the forehand could go at times. His serve, I didn't think until the end of 23 his serve was great. I thought it was very good. Now I think it's great. And so you look at the package, and basically you just have to play a whale of a match to beat him. And that's true of his key rivals, Novak and Carlos, too. They've got to play their very best. And then the other guys, the rest of the pack has got to play almost out of their minds. That's how I look at it. He's that good now. And frankly, I think he's going to get better on the – I don't see why, particularly on – I don't see why he can't become almost as good on clay and grass. I mean, most of the guys play on the grass essentially the way they do on the hard. I think he can make that adjustment. But fortunately for him, there's a lot – you're starting the year on hard courts and you're finishing the Grand Slam season on hard courts in New York, so that's to his benefit. And no, I think it's reached the point now where he's almost invulnerable on hard. Almost.
Yeah, and it's a shame we didn't get to see an informed Novak Djokovic against him, who was fully fit, of course, because from the level we saw from Novak in the quarterfinal stage against Alcaraz, for example, if he goes into that final against Sinner, it would have been a really interesting proposition, and it would have been a real test, I think, for him. That's what we really wanted to see. Would have been a rematch of the semi-final from last year, where, of course, Sinner got the better of Novak as well. So I'm sure Novak would have been really highly motivated in that matchup, and never lost an Australian Open final. So that would have been great to see.
No, that's mouthwatering to look back and think about what might have been. And I wouldn't have been shocked had they met and Novak was still healthy and the injury wasn't lingering, that we could have been looking at a 5-setter. And maybe he would have won the match mentally. I mean, you alluded to the mental toughness earlier, and I agree with your assessment there that there's nobody in men's tennis that has a stronger mind, especially in the biggest matches, the most important occasions than him. And that might have been what, that could have been what, that could have taken him all the way to the title. That could have been what made the difference. Not that Sinner would have cracked, but Novak might have willed his way to that title. I'm sorry we didn't get it too, because I don't think it would have been any, regardless of the outcome, I don't think it would have been anything like that strange match they played in the semis a year ago when Djokovic for 2 sets was just not Djokovic. And then he somehow managed to salvage the third in a breaker that it was just sort of a, again, professionalism and hanging in there and just pride that got him through that. But I never felt like he was going to win the fourth after doing that either. That was not one of their typical matches. But he played much better against Sinner in Shanghai, even though he lost in straight. The first was a tie break, and it was a very well played match. And they just haven't been playing a lot lately. They had
they haven't.
Yeah, 23 they did, and they played a lot at the end. And Sinner had the great Davis Cup comeback from triple match point down after they'd met twice in Turin. They'd split the 2 matches in Turin with Novak winning the final. So the rivalry was really taking off. And now we just haven't had the chances. But when they do, when they resume it, it's going to be a lot of fun to watch.
Yeah, agreed. I'd love to see it on the clay because Novak, I think, on paper has the edge on clay, but Sinner, of course, I mean, he made the semi-finals last year against Carlos. He can clearly play on clay, and I'm sure he'd be really highly motivated to do some big things on the clay to prove that, he's a big player on there. And I think people know that, but until he wins, a slam on clay, obviously Roland Garros, then that's when you start really taking notice and saying, okay, he's one of the contenders for sure. So hopefully we get that. If not at Roland Garros, at one of the Masters 1000 tournaments, hopefully. In terms of the final, it wasn't the best final, of course, but it had its moments. Zverev, I think, played, and I alluded to it earlier, some really solid tennis throughout. And I think he was trying to be proactive for the most part. However, in the big points, from what I could tell anyway, in my analysis, was that in the big points, he did go passive at times. There was a really strange moment, for example, in the tiebreaker in the second set where he had a forehand slice off a mid-court ball, which is extremely random. And then he shanked a forehand cross-court the following shot, I think probably because he had completely confused himself about how he wanted to approach the point. However, I also think there were some instances where, yes, he went passive, like I mentioned, but also he did try to play proactively, especially on the forehand in some of those pressure moments, but it just let him down because he's not used to being the one constantly trying to dictate in the points, I feel. And that's something that I think is missing from his game and something that he needs to adopt more going forward because he can't just play a more proactive brand of tennis for 2 weeks in a fortnight and then go back to type. So that's a very quick synopsis from me. I think that's just how I saw it. What was your view on the final and how it played out from your perspective?
I agree with a lot of what you're saying. I would only add, I maybe would be a bit more critical of Sasha than you are because he came in so fresh. Not just the fact that he only played the 1 set against Novak, but only lost a couple of sets. And the 2 4-setters that he had were pretty quick 4 sets. Humbert and Tommy Paul. And, okay, he had a couple of tie breaks to start the Tommy Paul match and was lucky to win those sets. But still, I'm just saying there weren't those typically long, exhausting, debilitating 5-setters that Zverev gets involved with in majors that sap his energy and that catch up to him in the end. Because he was the first one to say, after losing the French final to Carlos last year, that his legs were a bit gone by the 5th set. And he felt that might have been the product of the long matches that preceded it. This time, the freshness was there. I feel like I felt like he was in a little bit of a negative frame of mind. He didn't come out there that sharp in the first set, and Sinner played well and got his break and made it count. Then, of course, to me, the whole key to that match was the second set, because this is where Sasha had openings, chances at least, to get Sinner down 4 or 5, love 30. I thought Sinner served his way out of that really impressively. A couple of great wide serves in the deuce court, and he holds on from love 30 when the set could have been gone. And 5, 6, 30 all, and they played a great point. And Sinner managed to win that one and get it to the break. And then you alluded to the tie break and the odd use of the forehand slice. I get it. But what I didn't like was Zverev gets the mini break at 2-1 and then immediately misses a forehand, kind of a forehand inside in, just long, a bit unlucky, but you got to make that at that point. In other words, I think of great players that you've seen, and how often have you seen a Novak or a Carlos who's also great in the tie break, and other great players, and they get that early mini break and they're gone. Forget it. If they're serving at 2-1, you blink your eye and you're down 4-1. And Sasha didn't win either of those points. So instead of being maybe at 4-1, up or at the worst at 3-2, he's down 3-2, and he managed to get it back to 4-all, and that was unlucky. The net cord winner from Sinner was bad luck for Sasha, but he kind of put himself in the position where he could be the victim of some bad luck. Well, I thought if he would have played a bit better at 2-1 and maybe go to 4-1, he's got a little cushion in the tiebreak. Might turn out differently. Would it have altered the outcome of the match? I don't know. But all I know is that he needed that set more than Sinner did. And he had to get back to 1-set-all. And then I was a bit disappointed, by the way, in his attitude in the third. Looked to me a bit resigned to losing instead of saying, I'm going to fight like crazy. I think of, say, Tsitsipas playing Djokovic in the 23 final, and Djokovic has won the first and Djokovic wins the second in a tiebreak. And Tsitsipas did not hang his head. He fought hard all the way, even made the third set tiebreak interesting, after being down 5-love in the tiebreak, and made it tight. Djokovic closed him out. And I wanted to see some of that from Zverev because I still think Sinner may not have been feeling that great. I don't think Sinner wanted to be in a long match. So those are the reasons I'm a bit disappointed. I felt like this is Sasha's third chance. He's got Djokovic and others encouraging him and telling him how good he is. After the match, he had Sinner telling him how he'll get one of these. So the question to me is, why is it that his chief rivals, and Alcaraz would chime in with those guys because he knows how good he's been on the wrong end of the scoreline against Sasha often enough to know, including at this tournament a year ago. So why is it that they all think he's good enough to win a major and somehow he doesn't seem to think so? That's the part that I find disappointing.
Yeah, I agree. It's interesting because, as you say, a lot of his colleagues and peers seem to really be of the opinion that he should have already won one or he needs to win one because he's too good not to. And he did allude to that in the post-match press conference where he mentioned that he doesn't want to go down as the best player to never win a slam. I think that has been something that has been bandied about quite often about him in the last couple of years, especially as he's racked up, a lot of titles, just no Grand Slam titles. And that's been the biggest bit of silverware missing from his trophy cabinet. And I know it's the one that he wants the most, as he mentioned. But Steve, from your perspective, and we can get into the mental side in a second, but from your perspective on how he approached the match, there was two schools of thoughts that I could see from different tennis pundits and media, etc. And that was, if he wanted to win the match, he had two ways of doing it. And there were two different schools of thought. The first one was that he needs to go in, play aggressively, serve big, try and be the one dictating the points, potentially even coming forward, volleying, etc. The second school of thought was he needs to drag him into long exchanges, Sinner that is, and make him really work for each point with depth, and potentially drag him also in the match to make the match as long as possible because maybe Sinner hasn't been tested physically, and we saw the issue of the cramp, for example, against Rune. What camp are you in, Steve?
I was torn myself. I could see why he was a bit conflicted because, he's not sure that he can, how many of those long, strenuous rallies he's going to win against someone as solid as Sinner. So you want to be more aggressive. On the other hand, you want to be aggressive to the point where you're giving away too much and where you're the first one to crack and you're just asking too much of yourself. But so I wasn't that disturbed by the rally patterns from him. What I don't like, and I haven't liked this for some time, frankly, is you'll hear the likes of Jim Courier and others rightfully praising Zverev for the high first serve percentage. And this one, he was a little under 70. Often he's over 70, but he's never far from that range. what I don't like, and I would have liked, and nowadays his second serve is so much more reliable. He's not falling into that pattern of trying to either hit the second serve 85 miles an hour or 135. He's found a good middle ground. He doesn't double fault nearly as much. That being the case, I want him to go for the lines more in the first serves. I don't want to see 133, 135, and the ball coming back. And when I first got concerned about it was in the Tommy Paul match that we just alluded to a moment ago, where first two sets went to tiebreakers, and Paul served for those sets, both of them, and set points in both of them. Sasha admitted afterwards he was a bit lucky to win both of the sets. But my point is, I kept noticing during that match the number of first serves that Tommy Paul was able to get effectively back into play. And I'm saying to myself, that shouldn't be happening. And I'm seeing the number. You're seeing that the speed is there, but the accuracy is not. If the accuracy were there and he was hitting his spots as well as hitting it that hard, and it was closer to the lines and more deceptive, then most of those would not be coming back. And so I wanted more of that in the final two. I wanted to see him, because I feel like he shouldn't be panicking about what Sinner might do to his second serve. He should feel like, okay, I may be in a kind of a neutral position, but I'll be all right. But he should be wanting to win cheap, free points off the first serve more than he could in that match, and more than he does in general. And I just feel like he gets away with it. It's still a great serve. I don't want to diminish it, but I feel like it could be more effective, could be better if his percentage would go down. Maybe he's only getting 60% of the first serves in.
Yeah.
Some days maybe 58%, but they all count. Suddenly there's so many more free points and quick points that are immediately over with one swing of the racket. And I feel that should be very possible with him, but that's not the way that he and his father seem to be thinking. So who am I to question them? But I am nonetheless.
Yeah. No, I agree. I think it's a question of, do you want to be hitting 70% of first serves in but only winning 55% of those first serve points, or do you
Right.
want to hit 60% and win 80% of your first serve points? And
Yeah.
I think for Zverev, he needs to find the balance. I agree. I think he's a little bit cautious with the first serve placement, and he's obviously not taking anything off it for the most part, but he's hitting bigger targets. And the bigger targets is really in line with his game, right? I think as well, in terms of the way that he plays. So I think
but
for
you
him,
know what? Listen, these guys are so good, and he knows it. The likes of a Tommy Paul, a Carlos, a Novak, a Sinner, you could rattle off a lot of guys. They're so good on the return that you just got to assume, unless you hit a pinpoint, deadly accurate first serve, even if it's 138, there's a good chance they're getting it back. And I just don't think that makes any sense for him, because he's going to have to work hard in the rallies anyway, and Sinner's going to have certain advantages from the backcourt against him. The percentages are going to go in Sinner's favor. So why not make sure you hit a lot of aces and service winners, and don't worry about hitting a few more second serves. You can deal with it.
Yeah, I agree. One thing also that was interesting is that, and a last bit from me on the technical side from Sasha, was that I didn't see many backhand changes of direction down the line from him. And normally his backhand line is extremely effective against the majority of the field, because he's one of the best two-handers. And I think his backhand line as well is one that tends to really trouble people out of the forehand corner. But I think maybe he was a little bit weary of the fact that, you mentioned before that Sinner's very good out of the corners, but especially on the run on the forehand, he's extremely deadly. So I felt like maybe he played within himself a little bit on the backhand side, which was a bit of a shame. And I do wonder whether, if he was a bit braver, he may have got some success there. I'm not saying that it would have been a match-winning strategy, but I was watching it the whole match from start to finish, thinking, I think I can probably count on one hand how many times he's gone line with that backhand. Probably.
It's a good point. Part of it is Sinner's depth. It makes it a little harder. You're not getting that many great openings to do it, but it's something he needed to attempt to do more. And again, that's a certain negativity and caution that creeps into his game. And That's why he's always been on the cusp of winning majors, but hasn't won one yet. And let's face it, it's three very different opponents. These are all different opponents. It's Dominic Thiem at the U.S. Open, where you're up 2-0 and a break in the third. You're serving for the match in the fifth. And it's Carlos at the French last year, where you're up 2-1 and looking like you believe you're going to win it. And then it's gone in five, and now it's this one. So it's like different circumstances, different players, same result. So I got to believe he's going to get several more cracks here. But the question is he going to find? Is he going to end up like Andy Murray or Lendl, who lose 4 finals and then break through and are rewarded way past that time, with Andy winning a couple more majors and Ivan winning 7 more after his first? Or is he going to unfortunately fall into that guy? I still believe, I guess I would lean a little toward that he'll finally get one, but I'm still not convinced. I'm not convinced.
Yeah, I agree. The mental side is the biggest thing I think that he needs to work on. And I think I can maybe give him a bit of an allowance, given that it was clearly a heartbreaking loss with the comments after on court and post match. But it was just a very defeatist attitude, saying that he wasn't good enough. And I feel like from his perspective, he maybe doesn't address the fact that maybe mentally he's not quite there yet, rather than the fact that the skill set is. I think the skill set's there. It's the approach and the mindset for me. And if Ivan Lendl wasn't coaching Hubie Hurkacz right now, I'd say he'd be a great coach to bring in, because he's in the same position.
Yes.
As well.
That's it. That's really interesting. And of course, Ivan did work with him in the past, and he would have been ideal because he knows how it feels. But he also was able to conquer whatever inner doubts were surfacing and whatever he was enduring during the periods when he couldn't win those major finals. Ivan, he was able to conquer it, and I sure hope. I think it would be awful if Zverev went on to lose 2 or 3 more of these, and at the end of his career, let's say it was 4 more, he ends up 0-7 in major finals, and I think he's too good for that. But I worry that that's a distinct possibility.
Yeah, agreed. I think he probably needs to try and avoid Alcaraz and Sinner in the final, and then he may get some more success as well. So he might need a break of luck in the draw potentially. Maybe one of them gets injured or falls early, and then it opens up for him potentially. You never know. It's only 2 of them. It's not like when you had 4 with Murray, Djokovic, Federer, and Nadal. So he might get that slice of fortune. Before we move on to the women's, I wanted to ask you about the next gen players coming through, and we had so many incredible wins from Teen beating Medvedev. We had Mikkelsen beating Tsitsipas. We had Fonseca beating Rublev. We also had Jakub Mensik as well with some fantastic wins. Which of those players for you, Steve, at this Australian Open impressed you the most?
That's a good question. I mean, Tien certainly impressed me. I mean, when you're 2-0 up and you got a match point in the third set, and Medvedev aces you, and then before you know it, you're in a fifth, and you got an early break in the fifth, and things are looking bright again, and Medvedev gets back, and Medvedev breaks you at 5-all in the fifth and serves for the match up 15-love, and you win that match in a super tie break there at the end. And then go on and validate it in the next round. No, he impressed me a lot, because at first glance, he doesn't bowl you over with his talent, because, it's so much probing, and backhand I like his backhand, but he's not going to overwhelm you with it. But then you see that he's got that ability to step in and hit forehand winners. You see that he's just a winner. He's a great match player. He thinks his way through these matches. So I must say, I think I probably got the most enjoyment out of him. Of the group you mentioned. I liked what I saw, and I feel like he'll build on that. And also what I liked was attitude. After he beats Medvedev, he didn't show. I felt like he was very polite, but he wasn't showing Daniel excessive respect. It was kind of like, that he expected it of himself, and he was obviously a little frustrated, but not disturbed that he didn't close him out earlier. And it was just kind of like, he was talking as if it was just any other opponent. I mean, this is Medvedev. This, I mean, I thought that was impressive to me that he thought of himself that way, as opposed to I can't believe I beat this guy. That was not what he was saying at all. So, of those guys you mentioned, now Mensik has impressed me for a long time. He's going to get there. He's a big guy. I remember watching him a lot a year ago, and I feel like it's only a matter of time for him because he's a big guy who moves well. He's got a big game. I always like watching him play. And now you had a couple others. Throw me a couple others, Mike. You hit me with so many names.
Fonseca and
Yeah,
Mikkelsen.
Fonseca. Well, Fonseca, I thought it was exciting to watch him play that well in tiebreakers against Rublev, and he's got such a champion's mentality, and I love all of the expressiveness, how demonstrative he is, and always positive. The fist pumping and playing to the crowd in the best possible way that's only going to help himself. Then I thought it was okay that he lost to Sonego. I thought it was good. It was a good thing for him because maybe you don't want it too quickly, too soon. Take some lumps along the way, but the game is obviously there. The mentality is there. I feel like he's going to end the year. I'd be very surprised if we didn't see him around 20 in the world, but at the end of this year, I think he's that good. Because I think there's going to be some of these 1000s, and I think he can make a run. I could see him in a quarter of a slam, a couple of quarters at the slams, let's say. And I could see him doing well in some 1000. So I'm expecting some big things from him. But I did think it was okay that he didn't go on a tear here. It was enough to get the taste of it again, have one big win early like that. And then, okay, come down to earth, but it's not going to discourage him. So I felt I could feel the buzz, not even being in Melbourne. You could feel it, how much excitement he was creating on those grounds. And he's going to be very good for the game. Crowds are always going to like him because of his personality, the combination of his personality and his tennis.
Yeah, for sure. I actually managed to interview him at Wimbledon qualifying last year, and he'd lost his final round of qualifying, but he still came to talk to me, and he was very grounded, really mature young man, and spoke really well. So I was really impressed with him, and obviously watching him up close in that final round of qualifying as well. And he definitely does have something about it, something special. So I wouldn't be surprised if he breaks into top 30, top 20 even this year.
So you see him in the same range. I'm glad to hear that. No, he's very impressive, and I feel like I'd watched him win the next gen, and it's so hard. That format drives me a little bonkers. The first year I was kind of excited by it. Now I don't like it anymore because I feel like, what is the point of this? They're not going to use it anywhere else. Why not just play best of 3, no ad, and play full sets instead of these? I hate the 4-game sets, and I feel like he was worthy. Don't get me wrong. I didn't feel like he won that tournament because the format worked in his favor, but I don't like trying to judge players in that format. I want to see them playing the game, playing under more standard rules. So, but I still was impressed with what I saw there, and then again in Australia. So I'm excited about it, and I just hope he doesn't get hurt a lot. But he's incredibly mature for his age, remarkably mature.
Yeah, he really is. He really is. And talking of maturity, we move on to the women's. Madison Keys, at 29 years of age, an incredible performance from her, winning her maiden Grand Slam. And I think, from my perspective anyway, it was one of the all-time great runs to a maiden Grand Slam title, beating Swiatek in the semi-finals, Sabalenka in the final, she beat Rybakina, so all top 3 seeds. And then to add to that, of course, she beat Svitolina. I think it was a phenomenal run. A lot of 3-setters, a match point saved against Swiatek, a lot of drama. But for me, the biggest thing was the change in mentality and perspective, and she clearly almost came of age. What was the biggest differences you saw from her, Steve, in this tournament to get the title?
Well, I think you kind of touched on it. It was the mental approach. It was how well. How many times have we seen in the classic example with Sabalenka at the Open a couple of years ago, and 6-love, 5-3, and 4-2 in the third, and She loses a heartbreaker, and that would tended to be the pattern with her. You felt like in crunch time, you did felt like she didn't believe in herself, and you could almost predict the unraveling of her game at these pivotal moments. And you hated to see it because she's a very likable player. So I don't want anybody listening to this misconstrue at all. I don't mean that harshly at all. I just think that was the Madison Keys we saw so often. To do what she did here, that's why again I agree with the way you're analyzing it. You're beating the two women that have really been the pace setters in women's tennis, right? You're beating Swiatek in the semis, and this was on a night when Iga was playing well. I mean, this is the thing. We've seen her get tight and lose matches to people in straight sets and not show the best of herself away from the clay, and you're disappointed in Iga. I wasn't disappointed in Iga here. I thought she played really well. And she puts herself in a position there in that final set. She gets the break at 5-all. Madison had played so well up to 5-all and came from love 40 back to 30-40, and then played a drop shot that was not well advised. And she got burned by it and got passed. And you thought, oh boy, her chance is gone. And then for Iga to get to match point in the next game at 6-5. And then that was a terrific return from Keys down the middle to coax the error off the backhand of Swiatek, who was kind of rushed into the error. And then, another great return from Madison from the deuce court, and finally a double from Iga. And then to make these comebacks in that ensuing tiebreak, 3-1, 4-2, 5-3. She's constantly down 7-5. Then she's even down 7-8 serving. I mean, you can't put a foot out of line at 7-8. You make one careless mistake and you're down double match point, where she serves an ace. Then she follows with a service winner, and Iga finally misses on. Next thing you know, it's a 10-7 tiebreak win for Keys. So I thought that was very gritty, very gutsy win. And then to follow it by Sabalenka, I thought it sort of had all the momentum. She was shaking the first set, served a couple of doubles in her opening service game. I didn't think Sabalenka played a very good first set, and Madison was very solid. All credit to her for exploiting Sabalenka's not impressive form. But then Sabalenka took over in the second, started using a lot of drop shots. She played a very smart second set. And I would have thought heading into the third, it's going to maybe a 6-3 set for Sabalenka wins her third crown in a row. I mean, she's so good on that court. And again, the way that Keys hung in there with her all the way through the third and kept holding until she finally got that opening to break in the final game, and she did it. So to beat these players in the crunch like that, 7-5 in the third, 7-6 in the third, when they're not playing badly, that really made it extraordinary for me, is that she didn't really catch them on off days. Could you say Sabalenka could play a little better than she did in the first set? Yes, but she recovered her pride in her game. She started to play some really good tennis, and I didn't think that Sabalenka played a bad third set any more than Iga played a bad third. You can't say she played a bad third set in the semis, but Keys she had this attitude of sort of like the old-fashioned I've got nothing to lose. And she finally seemed to make up her mind, and she alluded to it in the press conference, like, I don't have to win a major. I think when she gave herself permission to do that, that must have made a big difference. That maybe explains why she was so calm in the crises of these matches, that she could somehow smile a bit and just keep playing and basically say, okay, well, if she hits that last shot out of reach, if she can win one more point, too good. But I'm not worried. It's not even and that was what she conveyed. So I feel like when you're beating two such highly accomplished players at the end of a major, on top of all the good wins that you mentioned, including Svitolina, including Rybakina, I mean, that was a fantastic run, and the whole string of three setters that she had throughout the tournament, but coming through in the end every time. I feel it's going to free her up, and now I'm encouraged to think that before her career is over, she can get one or two more of these. I mean, two might be asking for a lot, but I wouldn't be shocked, and I would be surprised if she didn't get one more somewhere in the next 2 to 3 years.
Yeah, 100%. I think it was such an impressive run, just solely because we've seen a lot of different runs, especially on the women's side, from players who won a Grand Slam here or there, and it's we can't take any credit away from them for winning those slams, but the runs haven't been the types of runs that Madison Keys has had. I think she won this tournament outright in the in the best way she could by beating a two-time Grand Slam champion, well, sorry, a two-time Australian Open champion, defending champion as well in the final, beating Iga Swiatek, making sure that she saved the match point there as well, and battling a lot of players who had played some incredible tennis throughout their careers. So I think it was just an incredible mental performance. The level, of course, was incredible, and I know she changed her racket and her setup and her mentality, as you were saying, about the fact that she didn't put as much pressure on herself, saying that it was okay not to win a Grand Slam. I think that all culminated in her playing very freely on court, and that was plain to see. And I think after her her win even to Iga Swiatek, she said that she questioned, I think, the match point. She said, "Oh, does she have a match point?" As if she didn't realize because she was so in that moment in the zone at that
Yeah.
time. So that was really interesting to hear as well from her, and to hear an athlete talk about it as if they say that when you're in the zone, you're just so concentrated, you don't think about what's going on around you, and that almost seemed to be the case with her. But I hope she carries on in this vein, in this form, because she'll be a real player, I think, if she carries on in this form at Wimbledon and the US Open, especially. I mean, she's got the game for it. We saw her play really well at Wimbledon last year, and
Yeah.
she
Oh,
lost to
yeah.
Paolini, and she got injured, of course, during that match, and she's
Right.
up in that
Right.
match. So and at home at the US Open. So, and I think it also starts to pass some pressure, interestingly, onto players, some of the American women, like Pagula, for example, who's been extremely consistent throughout her career, but hasn't managed to get over that hurdle. She's a similar age. I
Well,
don't think
you just
as
made me
well.
think of something. Sorry to interrupt, but you made me think how much fun it would be if we saw Keys playing at the U.S. Open in a big quarterfinal or semifinal or, heaven forbid, a final. If she comes up against a Coco or a Jessie Pagula or one of the other Americans, that would be tremendous. The fans would love it. I think they'd be completely torn, by the way. I don't think they'd know who to root for if she played Coco or she played Pagula.
Yeah, I agree 100%. And yeah, it's just an interesting one because I think now the women, they're going to be looking at Keys and saying, well, at 29 she can do it. Why we should be able to do it now. And Coco's won a slam, but she'll know that okay, a bit of the pressure's off her, and it's maybe on Keys a little bit now as well. And it's not just she's not the only American hope for the women each slam, but I'm sure she'll also want to make sure that she is the dominant force on the women's side. And she didn't have the. We can talk about Coco actually. She didn't have the best tournament, you could say. I mean, losing to Badosa, who played some really good tennis, I thought in this slam. But were you a bit surprised that she lost to Badosa at the quarterfinal stage?
Mildly, mildly. I mean, I know how good Badosa is. I thought that maybe Coco surviving that match with Bencic, a tough three-setter, that might be. Sometimes you get through a match like that and it sharpens you. And I thought maybe it might carry her to the title. So I was mildly surprised, but I liked her reaction after. She didn't sound discouraged at all. She sounded like she was going to just put it behind her in a hurry, and that's good because I felt like through that things got started so successfully for her and Brad Gilbert. And they got on a roll immediately that summer of 23. And she ends up winning the Open after having that great summer. And then she started to get pretty negative. I thought that period last year where she lost those matches to Navarro at Wimbledon and the Open, she looked really unhappy with herself, and 19 double faults at the Open, I guess it was. And, she just seemed to be beating herself up and really unhappy out there. And I hope those days are gone. I think the reaction to this is a good sign that she's just going to move right on. And so Coco will be very much in the mix again. And we've seen how well she can play in Paris. She's had a couple of great French Opens, and then maybe she's due for a good Wimbledon, and she certainly can come back strong at the Open where that's the title she's already won.
Yeah, for sure. I'm Interested to see how she now responds for the rest of the year. I think she clearly has a really good game on the clay and made Roland Garros final as well, Goff. So I'm sure she'll recover well. And she didn't seem too disheartened in the post match as
No.
well to the loss, which I thought was a positive sign because it showed a level of maturity where I think maybe you were in the presser at Wimbledon for when she lost to Navarro, and she clearly was quite distressed. And understandably, it was a very high pressure match against someone of a similar age who's also American in Navarro. And she had a lot of back and forth with her coaching team as well during that match. And she kind of struggled in it. But this time round, it was different. I thought she came out. She just said, "Look, Paolo played a really good match, and I didn't play my best, but look, I had a really good start to the year. So it can happen. I'm gonna take my learnings and move forward." And I thought that was a really positive sign.
Oh no, it was. That's why I kind of wanted to start with that. Is that without that reassured me right off the bat. If she'd come in and there was a lot of lamenting and angst and dissatisfaction and beating herself up and too self-critical, I would have been worried. No, she's going to be fine, and she realizes it's a long year ahead, and she's going to have more opportunities. And if she can, she had ended last year so well. She's going to be fine. Won the year-end championships, and I think she'll be in the thick of things at least two of these three remaining majors. I expect to see her in the latter stages and semis and maybe a final, and good, decent chance that she can win one of the remaining three this year.
Yeah, I agree. I agree. And what was your assessment on Badosa? She made her first Grand Slam semi-final. Where do you see her ceiling, Steve? Because it's interesting, when these players start, she's pieced it together with the fact that she's been healthy. I think her back has been a real issue. The stress factors in her back have been a real issue. But now that she's fit and healthy, the level's there, at least to make a Grand Slam semi-final anyway. What's her ceiling? Is it semi-finals? Is she potentially a Grand Slam contender going forward at some point? What's your assessment?
No, I hope I'm wrong because she's very appealing and she's got a good aggressive game, and I love the way she hits the ball off the ground. I like the attitude. I like the intensity. Do I see her winning one? Not necessarily. But I see her back in these stages a fair amount. Back in some more semis, maybe squeezing into a final, and top 10 player, lower part of the top 10. That's what I see for her. And I still get back to the point you made. I hope that the body holds up because I know how good she can be. But I still feel like the best players, I know she got Coco this time. Would she necessarily beat her in a rematch? I'm not so sure. And I don't think it was an accident that Sabalenka came out of that early deficit down 2-love, 40-love, and takes over the match. It was like that was her one opportunity. So, but I hope she can sustain this level because I think crowds love to watch her everywhere she goes. And it also might be, from the sounds of what Tsitsipas was saying today, that motivated him. That's how he put it. Her run there motivated him, and I hope it does, that it can pull him out of the doldrums and get him going again too.
Yeah, I agree because it's been an interesting partnership. She's seemed to have played her best tennis of her career, and for Steph, it's been almost some of the worst anyway for a number of years. And obviously, he's hit some really good heights. So, hopefully, he's able to now piece it together as well. Because it's a bit strange that it's gone different ways for both players. Normally, it kind of happens. You're married as well, Steve. So normally when if your wife's happy, you're happy.
That's correct. That is correct.
Hopefully it shines on him a little bit too. For Sabalenka, she played a really good final, apart from the first set, as you said, and she was clearly disappointed. And there's a lot of noise around her breaking the racket, and then she clearly went to cool down and came out and was herself again. What did you make of that situation?
Sabalenka's reaction after the final?
Yeah.
I felt like I didn't have a big problem with it in the sense that she was good at getting up, greeting keys at the net, sporting, then goes over and smashes the racket. and then comes back out and is good during the presentation. I feel like the racket smashing, I feel like there should be a bit more tolerance from observers, because it's one of the few ways that a player can vent, and they're just trying to get their frustration out. And as long as they're show their sportsmanship in the comments they make, and they're not begrudging to the opponent up at the net. To me, those things are far more important. And Sabalenka's she's very emotional. She was so disconcerted because she was that close, few games away from winning a third title in a row, and she's now starting to demand it of herself. So I didn't have a big problem with that, and I thought she was perfectly fine out in the presentation. So it was okay.
Yeah, I agree. I couldn't understand the uproar about it, because she obviously went smashed a racket, but then I think she realized, and she was mature enough to realize, okay, look, let's not stay here and take it away from us. So she walked to the locker room, got out of frustrations, came back fresh, and she was really good in the post match interview as well. I thought on court, gave a lot of credit,
Yeah.
rightly so, to Madison, and just she was too good on the day, and I think that was a fair assessment, and also cracked some jokes. And she likes blaming her coaching team as well for whenever she loses, which is quite funny.
Yeah.
And yeah, I mean, she's a great character, so that was great to see. Were there any women that you were pleasantly surprised by, a little bit disappointed by at the Australian Open from your standpoint?
No, I mean, really, obviously, it was really all about Keys, and pleasantly surprised there to make that kind of spectacular run, and very happy to see Badosa do that well. And I worry a bit about Rybakina and all. I don't think we need to go into all those issues with her coach, but I didn't like what happened there to bring Gorin into the fold and then to suddenly say you want your old coach back. And I that's not the way to start off with Gorin, to give Gorin a decent chance to help her. So she still seems a little muddled in her mind, and I don't know if she's feeling that great. I don't know what all the issues are, but I'm not happy with where she is right now, and I'm concerned about her. So that was more on a negative note, to see her continuing to struggle.
Yeah, I think. Yeah, go on. Sorry.
Go ahead.
No, I was just going to say on Rebecca, I agree, because it seems like she's had issues with injuries, and then obviously now the coaching situation, but she's too good a player, I think, not to be challenging for Grand Slam titles. And, you know, I talked to her a few times at Wimbledon last year, and I think she was the favourite, and I think it was a missed opportunity. She lost to Kuchikova. She doesn't have a particularly good head-to-head with her, but I still think that was a really big chance. She was the big favourite, I think, after the seeds fell. And after that, of course, she then didn't play any tennis until really the WTA finals. As she had a long break after. But in that Wimbledon tournament, I was thinking, look, okay, we're starting to see her build some momentum, and then it stopped flat. And then it seems like she had momentum at the Billie Jean King Cup, where she played some really good tennis, and the United Cup, even it was. And Kazakhstan did really well there. And then, of course, some of the pre-Australian Open tournaments, she did pretty well there as well. Lost the eventual champion in Keys, fine, but I'm just hoping that she gets the coaching situation sorted. I think she's got a new coach, actually, if I'm not mistaken. I don't know who it is, but I did see some news about that. So it's not Vukov, it's someone else. And I just hope she has stability, because she's too good a player, I think, to not be challenging.
Yeah, I just hope she'll give the new guy a fair opportunity, because Gorin didn't have a fair opportunity.
Yeah, which is a shame, right?
Excuse me?
Which is a shame.
Yeah, real shame. Because I thought he really could have helped her. Look, he's done a good job, not just with Novak. I remember what a good job he did with Marin Cilic and helping him win the 2014 U.S. Open and beyond. And yeah, he could have. And considering the way she plays, and the fact that the serve is the cornerstone of her game, and how much he knows he's so good on serving, helped Novak with his serve, and did a good job at changing Cilic's toss. And so he had a lot to offer, and not just with the serve, but that would have been a great starting point. And I feel like that had to have just been he must have seen it almost like a stab in the back. You've just made this trip to Australia. You're trying to help her, and suddenly she's telling you she wants to bring the former coach back into the fold. It's like, well, why did you hire me then? So too
Yeah.
bad. Very unfortunate.
Yeah, and Goran was such a great volleyer as well. And I feel like if Rebecca can volley well, I mean, that's so good.
Yeah.
I mean, it's going to add an incredible layer to her game. And we've seen that with Sabalenka, right? Sabalenka was very similar in the fact that she was just a powerhouse from the baseline. Now she's
Yeah.
had the drop shot. She's coming forward at times to volley. She's got different looks. It makes such a big difference
It
when you have
does.
those big weapons. If you can add a bit of panache and a bit of finesse to your game here and there. So, as we've seen with the top players. So, yeah, hopefully she pieces it together. Um, on Iga, actually, I wanted to ask Steve. I forgot to ask you on Iga. What do you think of her level generally? Because I think this was, in my opinion, her best Australian Open. Obviously, went really close against Madison Keys. Had a match point there as well.
Yeah, listen.
But with win for set and the shortened forehand, I thought she did really good.
No, she should feel good about the tournament. She was destroying everybody, and then she's 1 point away from the final, and it's not as if she gave it away, and she knows she played well, and I think it's a very encouraging step for her, and to feel like, okay, I did a lot better, and with some luck, I might have won that tournament. I mean, who's to say she doesn't beat Sabalenka in the final if she gets there? So I feel like she's definitely on the right track. It seems like she's put this drug suspension thing behind her, and she's just moving on, and she seemed at ease with herself, comfortable in her own skin. So, and playing the kind of tennis on faster courts that she needs to play, and the aggression was there, consistency was there. Yeah, this was a very good fortnight for her. I like where she's headed.
Yeah, I agree. I really liked her forehand because in the past, I feel like she's been rushed sometimes, especially against the big hitters on these faster courts. But I felt like it might be from win for set, but it seems like she's shortened her backswing. She was taking the ball earlier, which is interesting because generally she doesn't take the ball particularly early on her forehand with the extreme grip. And obviously she's really good on clay, so she tends to, wait for the ball a little bit. But she was taking it on the rise a lot, taking it really early, and she was having a lot of success against her opponents. And as you said, she was dominating the majority of them. So that was a real plus, I think, for me. And I think it puts her in good stead for the rest of the year, especially on the faster hard courts. It'll be interesting to see how she performs on the clay courts, given that she's tinkered her forehand a little bit now. And also her serve has also been updated. So it's worked well in this tournament, but on the slow clay courts, I'm interested to see whether it doesn't have any negative effect, or maybe she struggles to adapt a little bit initially because, especially on the forehand, I feel like it's a little bit of a change.
No, I think she'll be fine at adapting, and she'll go back. She'll stay with her old methodology on the clay, and then when she gets back on the grass and over to the hard court, the shorter backswing will reappear. I don't think that's going to be a difficult adjustment. She'll be fine.
Yeah, she's one of the most intelligent players, isn't she, on tour as well. So yeah, interested to see how she now plays the rest of the year. But a real positive sign, I think, for me from her side. Steve, is there anything else you want to touch on before we wrap it up?
No, I think we've covered. I think we've covered it pretty thoroughly. I've enjoyed the discussion, and I think we've gotten to all the key points for the men and the women.
Yeah, no pun intended about key points for Madison Keys, but
yeah, no pun. Yeah.
No, but yeah, thanks for being on as always, Steve. It's a pleasure to speak to you. And guys, yeah, do hit that like and subscribe if you haven't already. And hopefully Steve will catch up soon, maybe pre or post Roland Garros as well. But we'll speak soon.
Thanks for having me on.